The Last Man Standing. It was 1974. A college dropout named Norio Suzuki decided to take a tour. He planned on visiting Malaysia, Nepal, Singapore, and the Philippines, plus several other countries. He was excited about the trip and told his friends that he was going to search the wilderness for Lieutenant Haru Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman. Well, he succeeded on two of the three. He found a panda in the wilderness, and Lieutenant Onoda in a different wilderness. But a search of a large area of the Himalayan snowline did not reveal the abominable snowman. Now you're probably wondering who the heck this Lieutenant Onoda is. Well, let's go back over 7 decades to 1943 to tell our story. Haru Onoda was 20 years old when he was called into the Japanese Army. He was smart and chosen to be trained at the Nankano School as a military intelligence agent, specializing in guerrilla warfare. Months later, on December the 26th, 1944, Onoda was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines. His orders from his commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, were simple. You're absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we'll come back for you. Until then, so long as you have one soldier, you are to continue to lead him. You may have to live on coconuts. If that's the case, live on coconuts. Under no circumstances are you to give up your life voluntarily. As soon as he got there, he tried to get other soldiers to help him carry out orders to destroy the airfield and harbor, but they balked, and soon the Americans were using these areas to invade the island. Many of the Japanese troops were killed in the initial fighting, forcing him and a group of 3 other soldiers to retreat into the deep jungle and continue their missions. In the night, they would come out to burn buildings, wreck bridges, destroy crops, and terrify civilians. In October of 1945, after they killed a cow for food on a farm, they found a leaflet left by the locals, who were tired of being shot at by them, with a startling piece of news. It related that the war had ended on August the 15th and that they should come out and come down from the mountains. They talked about the leaflet for days and finally decided it was not true. Just Allied propaganda to trick them into giving themselves up. No way could the war have changed and their country surrendered so quickly. They had only been there a few months. Of course, they knew nothing of the horrific bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Also, they had been fired upon a few days before, and they didn't think this would have happened if the war were really over. Year after year, the 4 men huddled together in the rain, searched for food, and sometimes attacked villagers. They fired on the villagers because they considered people dressed as islanders to be the enemy troops in disguise or enemy spies. The proof was that a group of armed men would arrive shortly afterwards. In their minds, this absolutely proved they were the enemy. In early 1946, an American B-17 bomber covered the jungles with dropped leaflets printed with an order from Japan's General Yamashita to surrender. But Onoda and his 3 men discussed it and decided again it was an Allied trick. In 1949, one of his men slipped away and after 6 months alone in the jungle, surrendered to troops and was sent back to Japan. The 3 remaining men got even more paranoid, thinking he had betrayed them. 5 years later, in 1954, a skirmish on a beach with civilians killed another of his men, and then there were 2. 17 years later, in 1972, 27 years after they started, his last man, Kenshiki Kazuka, was killed in a fight with a Filipino military patrol. The Japanese thought he had been dead for years, but decided that since he had survived so long, that maybe the leader, Lieutenant Onoda, might still be alive. The Japanese sent a search party to try to find him in the jungle. Unfortunately, even though they completely swept the island, 27 years of hiding made him too good at his job, and they could not find him. Now this is where we came in. Remember that college student, Norio Suzuki, who was going to find a panda, Onoda, and the abominable snowman? Well, he came to the island in 1974 and made his way through the jungle, searching for the remaining guerrilla fighter. He did something a large search party could not do. He found Onoda and his hideout. He then proceeded to try to convince him to come home with him. Onoda refused. His commanding officers had promised they would return for him no matter what, and he was still waiting for them, and he did not believe the war was over. Finally, the student gave up and traveled back to Japan. But he wasn't through. He found Onoda's former commander, Major Taniguchi, working in a bookstore and talked him and the lieutenant's brother into going back with him. It was a shock for the lieutenant to see his commander and brother and learn the war had been over for 29 years and that he had wasted his life. He broke down, weeping uncontrollably. But soon he got up and put on his still in good shape, full dress uniform and marched out of the jungle and surrendered his samurai sword to Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos. Marcos made a decision that was very unpopular in the Philippines because about 30 people had been killed over the years in run-ins with Onoda's group. He pardoned Onoda for his crimes because the good soldier honestly thought the war was still ongoing. But it was a wildly popular decision in Japan, and when Onoda returned to Tokyo, bands played, and he was hailed as a national hero. Life in Japan was much different in 1974 than when he left it in 1944. Onoda couldn't adjust to the new Japan and bought a ranch and moved to Brazil. But in 1984, he and his new wife moved back to Japan and founded a nature camp for kids. In May 1996, Onoda returned to the Philippines to see once again the island on which he had hidden for 30 years. He seemed to find some peace on that trip. On January the 16th, 2014, Lieutenant Hiro Onoda of the Japanese Imperial Army died of heart failure at the age of 91. Well, that's our story for tonight, and we hope you'll join us next week for a new The Story You Never Heard. Have a good night. A Dark Day in Damascus. It's September the 18th, 1980. Airman Jeff Plum is riding in a pickup truck near the small town of Damascus, Arkansas, about 40 miles from his air base near Little Rock. Another airman, David Powell, rides beside him. On the outskirts of town, the truck turns into a small gravel road, goes through some woods, and pulls up to a fence. A concrete slab, weeds, and radio antenna protrude from the ground, but that's about all you can see. But once you slip through a door into the ground and travel down the metal stairs, you see a sight that is unbelievable. Even if you've ever been there before, it is still an awe-inspiring experience. You have entered a Titan missile site, the most powerful missile in the world. In the 14-story deep building, you find 3 stories filled with Air Force personnel controlling the site. A walk down a concrete tunnel into the silo, and you see, looming above, a 10-story tall bullet topped with the most powerful warhead in the world, all buried in an empty field in the empty woods. It, like all missiles at the time, is powered by liquid fuels, and one tank was rocket fuel, and the other something highly volatile called oxidizer. If they ever meet any place other than the rocket engine, there will be an explosion of extraordinary force. Airman David Powell is there to train newcomer Jeff Plum in the art of upkeep of the giant weapon. They're part of the PTS, the Propellant Transfer System Team, a group of very smart young airmen known for partying hard and riding motorcycles. This group always felt invincible. They could fix anything thrown their way, and that nothing could stop them. Their mission for this day is simple. A propellant tank is slowly losing pressure, and they need to take the metal cap off so more fuel can be inserted to bring the pressure back up. It shouldn't take too long. But a problem emerges. The hydraulic platform that moves up and down the missile, sort of the equivalent to a window washing platform on a tall building, is not operating properly, and there will be a delay before they can go up and take off the cap. They wait, and they wait. It's late Friday afternoon, and they realize they won't make it back for the usual party with their fellow rocketmen tonight. Finally, the lift is fixed, and they ascend over 8 stories to repair the missile. Then another problem. They find they have left the socket wrench they need in their truck up in the parking lot. It will be a 45-minute trip to get it. David believes there's a 2 nearby that will work. He gets it, and the only problem is the large socket wrench is very heavy and the parts don't snap together like they should. But they figure one can take the 8-pound socket connector and hold it on its long wrench handle long enough to get the job done. It works, and the cap comes off easily, and the new guy, Jeff, hands the 8-pound socket to David and says, "Here, you got this." It's a miscommunication. He doesn't have it. The heavy socket slips and falls, hits their platform, bounces off, and continues to fall for 8 stories. The stunned young man watches as the heavy metal object finishes its voyage. It will probably be okay. Almost everyone has dropped 2s in here before. But this one becomes a bad dream as it hits the thrust ring the missile sits on and takes a strange bounce and ricochets into the side of the missile, punching a small hole. Suddenly, fuel is spilling out of the fuel tank. Not a good sign. Jeff remembers David saying, "This is not good. This is not good." It wasn't. Deadly, skin-melting, highly explosive rocket fuel was spewing from a 10-story missile capped with the deadliest nuclear bomb in the world. After a minute of being terrified and confused about what to do, they notified Air Force Officer Alan Childers in the control center 3 floors below. They told him there was vapor in the missile silo. They didn't confess to dropping the wrench. Confused Childers shouts, "What do you mean there's vapor in the—" He never got a chance to finish the line because he was suddenly drowned out by loud klaxon alarms. Every warning light started flashing and warning horn beeping. Alarms and horns screaming, lights flashing, the last thing Alan Childers wanted to ever see, and it might well be. They shut the alarms off, hoping maybe it was just an electrical malfunction. It worked, and suddenly it was silent, but only for a moment, and then the alarms were back, screaming and flashing. By now, Jeff Plum and David Powell had made their way through the corridor and into the control room. They didn't say much. David didn't want more trouble, and Jeff followed his lead. The confusion about what was going on continues. And it's not like the fuel would leak out and everything would be okay. The tanks are pressurized like a car tire, and once the pressure goes away, the missile fuel tanks will start collapsing on themselves. Alan Childers and the command center's options are drying up fast. One of Childers' men asked Jeff and David again, "What in the hell's going on?" Airman David Powell starts crying. The site commander is now in the room and looks at him and says quietly, "You've got to tell us what is going on out there." David Powell cries harder, takes the blame, and says he dropped a socket wrench and it knocked a hole in the side of the rocket. As news travels up the Air Force chain of command, everyone is instructed to stay put in the missile site. Several hours pass. One of the main questions being debated is should everyone be brought out or take a chance and leave the missile site, which could probably explode at any minute. There's also the big question being discussed by the White House, the Pentagon, and the Air Base. The question is whether the nuclear warhead will go off if the missile explodes. This nuclear weapon was over 400 times stronger than the bombs dropped on Japan in World War II, and if it detonates, thousands will die in Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, and Indiana, and the radiation fallout would even continue till it blankets the East Coast. No fix for any of it. The eastern half of the country would be ruined for a long time. By now, Colonel John Mosier at Little Rock Air Force Base had made a decision that everybody should evacuate. It's almost midnight when they start bringing people out of the silo. Backup teams from the Little Rock base have arrived and stand near the silo on a night made foggy because of the escaping gas. It's a strange night. Alan Childers believes they should go back down and attempt to repair because nothing good is going to come of this if nothing is done. Finally, the Pentagon agrees, and 2 of the staff are ordered back into hell. Rex Huckley and Greg Devlin put on oxygen tanks and hazmat suits and hacked their way through the security doors. After 30 minutes, they have to be relieved by Airman David Livingston and Jeff Kennedy. They check the fuel in the air with a meter, and David Livingston radios back and says it's total saturation and ready to blow. America is in real trouble. John Moser at the control center in Little Rock orders them out immediately, and as they reach the top, around 3 o'clock in the morning, it happens. A gigantic explosion. All communications with the Damascus site go silent. In Little Rock, Colonel John Moser knows that in a nuclear explosion, you lose all radio signals for a while. He and his staff await the possible nuclear explosion that will take them from this earth. Back at the site, Alan Childers sees the night turn into the brightest day he's ever seen as the missile explodes. Then he thinks, wait a minute, I'm alive. Maybe the bomb didn't go off. Then there was a strange silence for seconds. No sound at all. Next, the sky starts falling. Chunks of concrete and gravel and metal rain upon the ground like a flood. As people run to get away, they are pummeled with the debris. Greg Devlin runs for his life as concrete chunks the size of pickup trucks rain down around him. He stops just in time for a piece the size of a school bus to hit right in front of him. All power's out, and the only light is from the burning grass and brush around the site, which casts eerie shadows of running people. The silo's 1.5 million-pound concrete and steel door was blown over 500 feet away from the site. Of the 2 airmen who got out of the silo just at the moment it exploded, Kennedy was blown over 150 feet from the silo and landed in the woods with a broken leg. David Livingston was trapped in the rubble and lay there for several hours before he was found and died later that day. 21 other people were injured in the horrific explosion. In May of 1981, 6 Air Force servicemen, Livingston, Kennedy, Huckley, Devin, Don Green, and Jimmy Roberts, were awarded Airmen's Medals for Valor for their actions that dark day in Damascus. As far as the nuclear bomb, the explosion blew it over a quarter of a mile, and it was found hours later in a ditch. At least one of its safety devices worked, and it didn't explode, sparing a large swath of America. The Air Force insisted there was never a chance of it exploding, but people inside the Pentagon later laughed at that assessment and just kept repeating how lucky America had been. We were. Well, that's our story for this week on The Story You Never Heard. Please join us next week for another story. And we want to thank Eric Schlosser for your riveting book, Command and Control, about this event. See you next week, and have a good night. A story for our time. It's Christmas Eve in 1944. It's a small cabin, almost engulfed in the thick trees of the Belgium Ardennes forest. On this bitterly cold night, you can see the orange glow of a lantern through the window. A full moon shines in the crystal clear sky. To the 12-year-old Fritz, who lives here with his mom, Mrs. Vinken, it seems a safe, warm, loving haven. They have a Christmas tree. He has presents, and his mother is cooking, and it smells good. The only disturbing thing about this almost perfect Christmas Eve night is that the young Fritz hears distant rumblings and isn't sure what they are. He asks his mother, and she tells him they are armies fighting, but not to worry. They're far away, and they will not be moving this way. He knows his father is in one of those armies and prays that he's safe. This isn't an ordinary Christmas Eve. This is Christmas Eve of 1944, and Fritz and his mom are living in the middle of the last major battle of World War II, the Battle of the Bulge, as it rages in the Ardennes forest near Bastogne. Suddenly, there's a loud knock on the cabin door, terrifying both Fritz and his mother for a moment. She raises a finger to her lips to shush Fritz and eases toward the door. She opens it, and standing in the doorway with weapons are a small group of battle-weary, freezing American soldiers. They speak no German, and she speaks no English, but after a moment or two, they figure out they can communicate in French. They're looking for any warmth and food. One of the soldiers is wounded, and putting aside her thoughts that if the German soldiers found out she was harboring Americans, she would be executed. She invites them in. They thank her repeatedly. She puts extra food in the steaming stove pots. Slowly, everyone warms and relaxes as she continues preparing the meal. The soldiers try to entertain Fritz. Then, there's another sharp knock at the door. Absolute silence settles over the room as she slowly moves to answer the door. As she opens it, her worst fears are realized, and she quickly steps outside and closes the door. Standing on her porch are 4 tired, freezing, hungry German soldiers asking her if she can help them. She said she can help and will prepare them Christmas dinner, but first they will have to take their guns and put them in the tool shed because she has company and that they may not like each other, but that it's Christmas Eve, a night of peace. They agree, and she says she will be back for them. She quickly goes inside and closes the door. She tells the American soldiers she has visitors outside and she wants no trouble, and she's going to have to take their weapons and store them in her back room. They surprisingly give their weapons to her, and she takes them away. She then goes back, opens the front door, and ushers in the Germans. Both groups are stunned. Mrs. Vinken asks them to sit at the table while she finishes the meal. The Americans move to let their enemies sit on the side nearest the fire. One of the Germans, an ex-medical student, now medic, sees the American's shoulder wound. He grabs first aid supplies from his pack and treats the wound. The atmosphere slowly relaxes as Mrs. Vinken begins to fill the plates with food. As they eat, she reads from the Bible, and she then declares this Christmas Eve is a night of peace in the Ardennes forest. They all bow their heads for a moment. Before the meal was over, the men found things they could smile and joke about, even though interpretation was tough and slow. Later that cold moonlit night, if you had been passing this cabin with the glow in the window, you would have heard everyone singing Silent Night. Later, the lamp was turned low, and the soldiers all bedded down on the floor of the warm cabin for a peaceful night's sleep. When the sun came up, they hugged and shook hands and wished each other well. The German medic treated the Americans' wound once more. They gave the Americans a map and a compass and told them which direction to get back to their units. Both sides wished Fritz a Merry Christmas and thanked Mrs. Vinken profusely. They left what gifts in the form of currencies they could and made their way into the dark Ardennes forest in different directions to finish the last major battle of World War II. That night in 1944 proved a lesson we need now, that we can all still get along. Now's a time in our country that we need to practice that, and we can do it. Well, that's this week's The Story You Never Heard, and we hope you will join us next week for a brand new story. We also hope you will consider subscribing to our podcast. Have a good night. Indiana greater metropolitan area. Owensville High School is famous for having the first glass basketball backboards in the state of Indiana. And now one of those backboards is in the Indiana High School Basketball Hall of Fame in Newcastle. It's also famous for its annual Watermelon Festival, which attracts people from a multi-state area. It was many decades ago in Owensville, and just before sunrise, on the morning of December 7th, when a custodian walked toward the Theodore Roosevelt Elementary School. He saw something strange in that pre-dawn light. He could make out 3 feet tall letters written on the sidewalk in colored chalk. Now, first of all, colored chalk was unusual in those days. Usually only the police had it to outline more than one body in a murder investigation. The letters on the wide sidewalk leading to the school stretched almost 100 yards, and in the pre-dawn darkness, the school employee had trouble determining what the message said. He had to walk it several times to determine what the 3 feet tall letters in the 100-yard sprawl spelled out. Finally, he had the confusing phrase in his mind. Soon a young student, Kenneth Sharp, arrived early at the school. He would in later years become a beloved and acclaimed basketball coach in Owensville and Indiana. He also walked the long message and confirmed what it said. He remembered the incident until his death in 2014. Most of the teachers and staff entered Roosevelt Elementary from the rear, not down the wide sidewalk that led to the front door of the rather elegant school built in 1917. The front walk, however, was used by a lot of the young students that lived in the immediate neighborhood. And those students saw the mysterious message also. The school was finally torn down, still in good shape in the late 1980s. Its gym, with the famous glass backboards, was in a sunken basement. And that facility was preserved as a community recreational area and named in honor of its old student and coach, Kenneth Sharp. But back to the story. Students, like future Coach Sharp, saw the message, but it seemed to make no sense, and soon they forgot about it and went about their school day routine. Then, in a few days, an unusually heavy winter thunderstorm moved across the sky, and soon bits of chalk were flowing into the drains. The storm erased all traces of the mysterious message that nobody understood. No one was sure who wrote the message, but some, in later years, seemed to believe it was a Korean War veteran, the late Bobby Rowe, who attended the school as a youth and who had been, because he couldn't remember a detail of his geography assignment, chastised by an overly critical teacher. It was said he spent that night writing something on the sidewalk. Hopefully it would be seen by the teacher the next morning, which he thought would make her feel bad about humiliating him. He wanted her to know how he felt, but it was pretty ineffective and was soon gone with the rain. Plus, most people believe that it is just a weak, convenient story made up to give us something rational to believe about something that wasn't rational at all. The December 7th strange message didn't make any sense at all and stirred up very little conversation other than the school principal thought the vandals who wasted that much chalk should be paddled. Of course, it was not an act of vandalism big enough to even be mentioned in the local newspaper. Now, I know you're wondering what the message was that no one paid attention to on that sidewalk in Owensville, Indiana, on that December 7th. Well, the 3-foot-tall, 100-yard-long message simply read, "Remember Pearl Harbor." Now, I know that no matter what age you are, you'll know enough history to know that Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th, 1941, and plunged us into World War II. It was one of the most vicious attacks ever launched on our nation. And remember, Pearl Harbor became a rallying cry for our country, and still is. We even still seem to have at least one movie a year on the screens that is somewhat about Pearl Harbor. Now, I know you're wondering, why didn't the discovery of that battle cry in Owensville on that early morning of December 7th cause an outcry? And why weren't upset people pouring out of the school chanting, "Remember Pearl Harbor," as they rushed out to serve our nation, like all other cities in this country did on that day? Well, there was a good reason. You see, when the giant chalk battle cry was discovered on that fateful December day, it wasn't the day the battle plunged us into World War II, December 7th, 1941. That giant chalk battle cry in Owensville, Indiana, was found on the sidewalk on December 7th, 1939. That's right, December 7th, 1939. 2 full years to the exact day and moment before the Japanese surprise attack on our country. Well, that's our story for tonight. We hope you enjoyed it and will join us next week for the story you never heard. Good night. That singer from Detroit. You may know this story, but it still seems worth telling during this holiday season. There was this guy. His name was Sixto Rodriguez. Sixto, named because he was the sixth son in his family, was born on July the 10th, 1942. Growing up in Detroit, the son of Hispanic parents who immigrated there in the 1920s looking for hope in America. It was as tough on immigrants in Detroit as it was the rest of the nation. They were marginalized, given the lowest wages, and pretty much forced to live in the least desirable inner-city housing. By the time Rodriguez was 16, he had started playing music on his family's guitar, and he was good. Plus, he had a great voice. Eventually, he managed to beg for and play some gigs in a few bars in Detroit, and he did get encouragement from his audiences, urging him to keep it up. he was good. A lot of his music reflected what was going on in his city of Detroit, taking on a political tone and pointing out the plight of the city's downtrodden and inner-city citizens. Remarkably, through it all, he managed to stay in school, worked hard, played a little music, and realized a long-time goal in 1981 by earning a degree from Wayne State University in philosophy. It was 1969 when record producers Dennis Coffey and Mike Theodore, just by chance, happened to walk into the Sewer, a Detroit bar. They saw a shy Sixto Rodriguez playing for an audience with his back facing them. Rodriguez had a soft voice but a powerful message, and the audience seemed to love it. He was champion of his city's downtrodden, and the only way he knew how to help was to express it in his song.
The mayor hides the crime rates, councilwoman hesitates, public gets irate, but forgets to vote dates. Weatherman complaining, predicted sun it's raining, everyone's protesting, boyfriend keeps
The producers decided they wanted to record it. A hesitant Sixto finally agreed, and his album, Cold Fact, hit the U.S. market in 1970 on the Sussex record label. It started out great, with Billboard giving Cold Fact a 4-star review. But the album sold only a few copies in the United States, and then it promptly died. Sussex had Rodriguez record a second album, Coming from Reality, and released it in 1971. And guess what? It tanked also. 5 weeks later, unceremoniously, Sussex dropped him from the label. That was it. No more albums, and he even quit playing the Detroit bar scene as often. What did he do? Well, he sort of gave up on a music career and returned to back-breaking construction and demolition work. He was barely making a living, but making a living, unlike many others from immigrant families in a deteriorating Detroit. One good thing happened to Sixto back in his Detroit neighborhood. There was an old house that needed a lot of work, and it was going to be demolished by the city. He managed to buy it for $50 on a promise to fix it up. He did, and he still lives there today. He cared about his people and got more active in his community. He even tried politics once, running for the Detroit City Council. Unfortunately, the city misspelled his name, and he lost. You know, it's a funny thing. Even though his albums totally failed in the U.S., a decade later, an Australian company acquired some rights from the old Sussex label. And slowly, people in South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia began to buy a few singles, and everyone praised the singer. Of course, it was before the internet and Facebook, etc., so Sixto had no idea that somewhere out there, somebody loved him. In 1971, legend has it that an American woman visiting her boyfriend in Cape Town, South Africa, had a copy of Sixto Rodriguez's album, Cold Fact, with her. Her South African friends loved it and wanted it, but couldn't find it anywhere. Soon her copy had been bootlegged and was becoming very popular. That inspired a South African record company to buy rights from Sussex and start remanufacturing both albums, Cold Fact and Coming from Reality. Unfortunately, Sixto had no idea what was going on and never saw a penny from the rights acquired from his old label, which by now had disappeared. In South Africa, although Rodriguez had no idea, his popularity was growing, and South African fans wanted to know more. But it was a little awkward because in the 1970s, South Africa was a troubled country, and television and other media was often censored. Those who opposed the government found Rodriguez's anti-establishment and political songs relevant to their lives. But because of his subtle political messages and one song, Sugar Man, that had a drug-related reference, Rodriguez's songs were banned from being played on the radio in all of South Africa. And this, in turn, just elevated the desire for fans to buy his songs. As Sixto Rodriguez arose long before dawn in Detroit every morning to go out on another construction job, he had no idea that somewhere, someplace, people really loved his music. Then, devastating news. Word spread across South Africa that Rodriguez died in a horrible way. He played one last gig, music from his second failed album, and then he committed suicide on stage by shooting himself. In a few other places, like Australia and New Zealand, they continued to play his music, but not with the frequency it was played in South Africa, where, incredibly, he was now more famous than Elvis and the Rolling Stones. By the late 90s, the internet was springing up around the world, and a record store owner in South Africa, Stephen Sugar Segerman, and the journalist Craig Bartholomew Strydom decided to honor Rodriguez by tracking down people who knew him in his last days. They put up an internet website all about their hero. In 1997, 3 decades after the release of his first album, Sixto Rodriguez's daughter Eva was randomly looking at her computer and made a stunning discovery. It was the South African site by Segerman and Strydom dedicated to her father. It was named the Great Rodriguez Site. It had a picture of her father on the side of a milk carton asking for any information. Now, Eva quickly reposted, saying, "He's my father, and I'm serious." Segerman called that night, and Eva learned all about how famous her father was in South Africa and how his records had sold by the millions. They talked a while and agreed to the next step. The next step happened 3 days later, when at 1 o'clock in the morning, Segerman's phone rings and he hears a voice saying, "Is this Steve Segerman?" "Yes," he replies. Then the voice answers, "This is Sixto Rodriguez in Detroit. My daughter says I should talk to you." Segerman filled him in about his search for him and how his music had changed so many lives there and his records had sold millions and how everybody thought he was dead. And finally, he ended with, "Would you come to South Africa and do a show?" Well, it took some doing and persuading by Eva and his 2 other daughters, but he reluctantly agreed to take time off his construction job and make the journey. In the meantime, the reporter Craig Bartholomew Strydom published an article about Rodriguez's life that went viral. Nobody in South Africa could believe the man they thought died years ago was still alive. And the people in the United States didn't think he could possibly be as famous overseas as this reporter was saying. It was 1998, and Rodriguez and his 3 daughters were setting off on a long journey, still doubting that anyone would care, and just not sure what to expect. A clue came when they arrived at the airport in South Africa and were picked up in a limousine. The minute the car left through the airport gate, it was surrounded by shouting paparazzi and fans. In the wings waiting, a nervous Rodriguez was finally led onto the stage, and the capacity crowd of 5,000 people erupted into cheers and screams. It would be a full 10 minutes before he could start playing. The concert was wildly successful, and at the next show, another 5,000 people were on their feet. They loved this man, the man they believed had been dead for decades. Sixto Rodriguez had arrived late, but he had certainly arrived. He went on to play 6 more sold-out shows in South Africa before heading back to the United States. United States fame didn't come to Sixto until the brilliant filmmaker Malik Bendjelloul created a documentary about him, Searching for Sugar Man, in 2012. The acclaimed film won many awards, including an Oscar nomination. Sixto was invited to the award show, but he didn't go because he didn't want to take any attention away from the filmmaker. He was asleep when his daughter called him to say the film won the Oscar. After the Oscar win, he did make several appearances on TV, such as the David Letterman Show. Several networks continued to do news stories about him, and until recent years, he still worked in construction and lived in his $50 house. He has been happy to give any money he makes to help worthy causes, his daughters, and to people who have helped him along the way when he needed it most. And that's the story you never heard. Have a good night.